Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. That's the most important thing in Congress, to be able to get together on a Friday. It's a challenge. I would like to thank the organizers, thank the speakers, media. Thank you very much for covering this. Speakers have 10 to 11 minutes. So I decided to have a plan for those 10, 11 minutes. And then when the panel will open, I'll be happy to engage with my colleagues here at will. And you'll be the ones to request what to talk about. I listened very carefully to what my colleagues have mentioned in terms of Iran. I learned a lot. Iraq, I learned this beautiful sentence, the Soleimani Parliament of Iraq. So I'm going to use it this afternoon on TV. Over the past 30 years, that's when I emigrated. I was, to disclose, born and raised in Lebanon. I think I had two benchmarks that led me to my comments today. Intellectual ones, published one. One was a academic journal article in 1992, which basically announced or projected this Upper Middle East alliance axis between the Iranian regime, the Assad regime, and eventually Lebanon. And I projected, the article is still there, that the first thing they want to do is to get rid of the bridge in between, which is Iraq. I mean, take over Iraq so that they could project from Iran to the Mediterranean. So that was one benchmark. And I would like to contrast today to that initial genesis of the Iranian strategy. The second benchmark was in 2011, just 6 months before the so-called Arab Spring or upheavals. I published the book that you read, which was titled The Coming Revolution. And in that book, basically, almost or more or less, I have projected the various revolts and revolutions, focusing, of course, on North Africa, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia. But I focused also on Iran. The Green Revolution was still in the background, 2009. And of course, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. So from these two published backgrounds, I would like to focus on Lebanon. I'd be happy to talk about all other cases later, and also US foreign policy, which I think is of interest to you. But let me focus on Lebanon. Lebanon is very difficult to explain. I think Iran and Iraq, not just the size is larger, and the news are vivid from there, but Lebanon has been complex. It's smaller in size, it has a very long history, and it changed a lot before it gets to what it is right now. So if you allow me in 2 to 3 minutes first, I will do a flight, 60,000 feet view of where this revolution that has started in October, I think 15 or 17, and continues to be, where is it coming from? Especially that I'm not sure about who knows what and more or less about Lebanon. So in a nutshell, the country was formed in 1920 by the French mandate. Before that, it has centuries and centuries of history. When the modern Lebanon was formed, it happened to be a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country, very much many communities, 17 in total. When the French left in 1943, they left behind them a very strange structure, multi-sectarian country on the one hand, but they created a sectarian government which was based on political sharing. President has to be Maronite, Prime Minister Sunni, Speaker Shia, so on and so forth. And stable. Elections were real elections, was a parliamentary republic. But the miracle really was its economy. Yeah, there were many experts coming from Europe, maybe from the US, in the old days before the war in 1975, and they were tasked to understand how this economy functioned. Lebanon has no oil, has no nothing except, snow, good restaurants, banks, but the money coming to the banks, there was no explanation. Now, later on, people started to understand it was the regional money, the money from the Gulf that was developing, and the money from the emigres. What needs to be factored in any analysis about Lebanon is that the population of Lebanon now is 5 million, but the population of Lebanese in the diaspora is about 15 to 17 million. Give you an example, Brazil has about 8 to 9 million from Lebanese descent, 20 members of the Federal Assembly or Congress. so on and so forth in Latin America, Australia, Canada. So that wing of Lebanon, you always have to factor it in as an economic lifeline into Lebanon. That's how you explain how there was always a sort of a block of money sitting in Lebanon despite all the wars. I mean, Lebanon went through a 15 years long war. Iraq and Iran, is it 7 years or something like that? 8 years. So these are important questions to understand that today the challenges are of two kinds. And I'm sure it applies to Iraq and in Iran. But in Lebanon specifically, you have the economic game, up and down. And then you have the political, geopolitical, sectarian, regional, all of that is another track. And often our media here, since the beginning of the war in Lebanon, 1975, did not report really accurately. Either it reported partially, and or with slogans. It's like almost a cartoonesque explanation of what's happening in Lebanon, especially the Euro-American media. And now we understand why, especially after the Iran deal. There are reasons for why the media, explain things the way they did. So let me go quickly. This whole world of Lebanon's success economically was shattered in 1975 during the war, the Lebanese classical war, 75 to 1990. That's a 15 years war. Now, the alignment of forces in Lebanon changed during the war. In the beginning, it was the PLO with all its organizations linked to many Arab regimes, plus the far left link to Moscow. This is all in the archives now. Plus the Muslim/Islamist, and there were differences between the Islamists were smaller in size, but the traditional Muslim forces were the ones who would confront but want to get to another deal with whom? With the Christian side and sectarian side and the Lebanese army. So we're going to bypass all of that because it went through many, many back and forth. And then Lebanon was invaded twice, once by Syria under the Assad father regime, and then by the Israelis later on because of the PLO. So Lebanon, at the end of that war, has solidified in two large blocks. One block was controlled by the Assad regime. That's the bottom line of it. And I called it a condominium. It has the Assad regime army occupying. It has Hezbollah. And since the revolution of 1979, Assad went to Tehran and concluded in a strategic agreement, which was signed with the Iranian regime. And since then, those two groups, the pro-Syria, pro-Assad, I would say, and then the anti-Syria, counter-Assad. At the end of the war, one bloc won. And this is how the media in the West did not report it accurately, because who writes the history? The people the victors. The people who are the winners are going to write the history. So what the New York Times, Le Monde, and everybody in the West has published is that the war is over, there is a reconciliation, and then now let's focus everything on reconstruction. If you go back to the archives, it was like the longest reconstruction in the history of reconstruction. People would pour in money. But let me get to that point in a second. So at the end of the war, yes, there was an agreement in Saudi Arabia, because you have to have a format for the end of a war. But those who won were the axis between the Syria Assad regime and Hezbollah. That's the condominium that ruled Lebanon from 1990 till today, with one little hiccup in 2005. I'm going to mention that one. All right. So what was the deal in 1990? The deal was that the Assad and the Hezbollah condo over Lebanon did this. They said to the politicians, because they needed all the politicians from all religions, look, we, Assad and Hezbollah, take care of the national security and sovereignty of Lebanon. It's us, meaning we occupy. We call the shots. We do the war with Israel when we want. We do the hostage situation with America, so on and so forth. You, the politicians, you have the dineros, the money. You make money, and Lebanon was sustainable financially. So they unleashed this band of politicians who are hungry to take over all the financial interests, and they did. So they started to nibble on the strong cash of Lebanon for many, many years. This, you could summarize it with one term: hyper-corruption. There was always a corruption in Lebanon. but at least it was manageable. But the second corruption, the one that started after 1990, it was sucking the air out of the economic system of Lebanon. Now, why did it sustain? Because of three caches that were coming. One now is coming from Iran, this $1 billion going to Hezbollah. We're going to spend it. The other one coming from people living in the Gulf, the Lebanese living in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and all that. And then a third one, the diaspora. So while there was a corruption, there was always a feed coming in. It explained the survival till 2005 of that system. 2005, there was the first Cedars Revolution, the first revolution. 1.5 million people walked in the streets of Lebanon. That was backed by the US and France. And the result of it was the withdrawal of the Syrian army. But what was not solved was Hezbollah. So Syria withdrew, Hezbollah stayed behind. And now we're going to go on a journey, and we get here, from 2005 till October of last year. So the country was not ruled by Assad anymore directly. It was ruled by Hezbollah. And Hezbollah became a mega Hezbollah. The difference this time is economically it was not sustained anymore because the cash has gone and because of the clash between the Arab coalition and Iran. Arabs were not investing much in Lebanon anymore. So now the level of societal acceptance of a country controlled by Hezbollah has lowered, which explains, and I brought you home now, how a huge popular uprising occurred as of October. They were rising initially because of the economic, very, very severe collapse of the country. The cash actually has fled the country. And because, of course, backing that system is Hezbollah. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that a majority of Lebanese now of all sects, and as my colleagues have mentioned, you have Sunnis all over the place, Christians, Druze, a large chunk of Shia, even demonstrating in Hezbollah's areas. They rose. Problem is, they rose at a time where the international community has abandoned Lebanon. So, as I expected already last year, this revolution in Lebanon is going to take a long time. This is not like 2005, we do a big 1.5 million revolution on the streets, and it's so. No, this is going to be the long run, exactly as in Iraq, exactly as in Iran. Right? It's going to be very similar. So, let me leave you with a couple conclusions. Number one, in Lebanon, the current situation, you have a militia force that is blocking the revolution. You cannot go, and that's, for example, my critique of how movements of change, and I saw how Eastern Europe has done. You cannot just say, I want to change the Lebanese government, I'm going to bring the reformers and what they call them, the technocrats, and then everything will be fine. You have Hezbollah. If you don't take care of that terror forces that is blocking those reforms, then you cannot do reforms. So the Lebanese protesters started to understand that in addition to the fact that Hezbollah on the ground, in the first few weeks they let them happen, it's okay, but then they realized, Hezbollah realized, like the Iran regime realized, like the Iraqi regime realized, no, these guys are serious. They want a regime change, or a government change in Lebanon. So Hezbollah took to the streets. It was not bloody like Iraq and Iran, hopefully it won't be, but it signified to the protesters, guys, you're going to accept my rule. The second element is the Lebanese army, and we could talk a lot about it later, but the Lebanese army is an entity that is there, and it has two legs. It is under the influence of the government that has Hezbollah in it, and even inside the Lebanese army, that's not a secret, and it has good relations with the United States. Now, I could go on for an hour on the army. I'm not going to do that because it is in between the two. And last, we could discuss the U.S. position because as for Iraq and as for Iran, the U.S. position has moved, not to the speed of what the demonstrators want yet, but it has moved away from the previous administration policy, which was the Iran deal policy, which was we cannot confront Hezbollah, we cannot confront the Hashd in Iraq, we cannot confront the Pasdaran, because we have a larger interest with the Iranian regime. And I think this administration, I'm not here to defend or to criticize, has operated the beginning of a change of U.S. policy. So I'd be more than happy to discuss the evolution of that change when the panel will open. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you.